The gunshot echoed across the desert valley like a crack of thunder, and Ryder Thornton watched the rusted padlock fall away from the iron shackles binding the woman's wrists inside the abandoned stagecoach. Dust motes swirled in the Arizona sunlight streaming through the broken door as she looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, her dark hair matted with dirt and dried blood. He holstered his revolver and extended his hand toward her, his voice rough from days on the trail. "What's your name?" She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, her breathing shallow and rapid. When she finally spoke, her voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Fiona Jameson." Ryder pulled her gently from the stagecoach, steadying her when her legs buckled beneath her. She couldn't have been out here more than a day or two, but the July heat of 1883 was merciless in this part of Arizona territory. He guided her to sit on a nearby boulder in the shade of a scraggly mesquite tree, then retrieved his canteen and handed it to her. "Slow sips," he warned as she grabbed for it desperately. "You drink too fast and you'll just bring it back up." Fiona nodded, forcing herself to drink carefully despite the raw thirst burning her throat. As she lowered the canteen, she finally got a proper look at her rescuer. He was tall and lean, maybe 30 years old, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his dusty shirt. His eyes were a deep brown, watching her with a mixture of concern and wariness. "Thank you," she managed, her voice already sounding stronger. "I thought I was going to die out here. You nearly did." Ryder crouched down beside her, examining the raw welts around her wrists where the shackles had bitten into her skin. "Who did this to you?" Fiona's jaw tightened. "Men who were transporting me to Yuma prison. Said I killed a man in Tucson. Did you?" She met his gaze directly. "He tried to force himself on me. I defended myself with a fireplace poker. Apparently that makes me a murderer in the eyes of the law." Ryder studied her face, looking for signs of deception. He'd been a lawman once, back in Texas, and he'd developed a sense for when people were lying to him. This young woman, probably not more than 22 or 23 years old, looked him straight in the eye without flinching. Whatever had happened in Tucson, she believed she'd been justified. "Where are the men who were transporting you?" "Dead, I think. We were ambushed 2 days ago by bandits. There was shooting and the driver took off at full speed trying to outrun them. The stagecoach hit something and flipped. When I came to, everyone was gone. The horses were cut loose, the strongbox was missing, and I was still chained up inside." She looked down at her torn dress and scraped arms. "I've been calling for help ever since." Ryder stood and walked over to examine the stagecoach more carefully. The evidence supported her story. Bullet holes pocked the wooden sides, and the wheel on the right side was shattered. He could see where the traces had been cut to free the horses. Scavengers had been at work, but whether they were human or animal he couldn't tell. "Can you ride?" he asked, turning back to Fiona. She nodded. "I grew up on a ranch outside of Santa Fe. I've been riding since I was 5 years old." "Good. We need to get out of this heat and find some shelter before nightfall. There's a small town called Coolidge about 15 miles northeast of here. We can make it by sundown if we leave now." Fiona rose unsteadily to her feet. "I don't have any money to pay you. The bandits took everything. I'm not asking for payment." Ryder walked over to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that had been waiting patiently in the shade. "I'm asking you to stay alive long enough to tell someone in authority what really happened in Tucson. If what you're saying is true, you deserve a fair hearing. And if they don't believe me," he looked back at her over his shoulder, "then I suppose we'll deal with that when the time comes." Ryder helped Fiona mount up behind him, and she wrapped her arms around his waist as they set off across the desert. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, turning the landscape into a shimmering haze of heat and light. She rested her cheek against his back, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, and for the first time in days, she felt something other than fear and despair. They rode in silence for the first hour, saving their energy and water for the journey ahead. Ryder kept a steady pace, neither pushing the horse too hard nor dawdling. He'd grown up in this country, knew its moods and dangers intimately. The desert could kill you in a dozen different ways if you weren't careful, and he had no intention of letting this woman die after going to the trouble of freeing her. "Why did you leave Texas?" Fiona asked suddenly, her voice close to his ear. "What makes you think I'm from Texas? Your accent. And the way you wear your gun. I knew a Texas Ranger once. You carry yourself the same way." Ryder was quiet for a moment. "I was a Ranger, 5 years, left after my wife and daughter died of yellow fever. I'm sorry. It was 3 years ago. I came to Arizona Territory looking for a fresh start, ended up working as a scout for the Army, then as a guard on the railroad. Now I'm just drifting, I suppose, taking jobs where I can find them, trying to figure out what comes next." Fiona tightened her arms around him slightly. "And what brought you out to this particular stretch of nothing?" "I was heading to Coolidge to meet with a rancher who's looking to hire some hands for the summer. Spotted the Stagecoach from a ridge about a mile back. Came to investigate and heard you calling out." He paused. "Lucky for both of us." "Lucky for me," she corrected. "You just complicated your life considerably by helping a fugitive. I've complicated my life in worse ways." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they finally caught sight of Coolidge. It wasn't much to look at, just a handful of buildings clustered around a dusty main street, but it had a well and a general store and a small boarding house that served meals. More importantly, it had shade and water and beds. Ryder guided his horse down the main street, acutely aware of the curious stares following them. A strange man riding into town with an even stranger woman clinging to his back was bound to attract attention. He pulled up in front of the boarding house and helped Fiona dismount, then tied his horse to the hitching post. The boarding house was run by an older woman named Mrs. Chen, a Chinese immigrant who'd come to Arizona during the railroad boom and stayed after her husband died. She took one look at Fiona's condition and immediately ushered her inside without asking questions. "You get her cleaned up and fed," Ryder said, pressing some coins into Mrs. Chen's hand. "I'll be back in an hour to check on her." He left before Fiona could protest and headed to the general store to buy her some proper clothes and supplies. The store owner, a balding man named Harold Porter, eyed him suspiciously as he selected a simple cotton dress, undergarments, boots, and a wide-brimmed hat. "That woman you brought in looks like she's been through hell," Harold said as he tallied up the purchases. "She has." "She in trouble with the law?" Ryder met his gaze steadily. "She's a woman who defended herself against a man who tried to hurt her." "Whether that's trouble with the law depends on who's doing the judging." Harold wrapped the items in brown paper and tied them with string. "Fair enough. Just know that Marshal Dalton from Tucson comes through here sometimes. If there's wanted posters out on her, he'll hear about it." "I appreciate the warning." Ryder carried the package back to the boarding house, where Mrs. Chen informed him that Fiona was upstairs taking a bath. He left the clothes with the older woman and went to the small saloon across the street to get a drink and gather his thoughts. The saloon was nearly empty at this hour, just a few locals nursing beers and playing cards in the corner. Ryder ordered whiskey and sat at the bar, trying to figure out what he was going to do. The smart thing would be to leave Fiona here with some money and ride on to meet with the rancher as planned. She wasn't his responsibility, and getting involved in her legal troubles could land him in serious hot water. But he couldn't shake the image of her eyes when she'd looked at him in that stagecoach, the mixture of hope and fear and desperate relief. He'd seen that look before on the faces of people he'd rescued during his ranger days, and it had always struck something deep in his chest. Besides, if her story was true, she'd been failed by a system that should have protected her. He was still mulling it over when Fiona walked into the saloon an hour later, transformed by soap and clean clothes. Her dark hair hung in damp waves past her shoulders, and the simple blue dress misses. Chen had helped her into fit reasonably well. The cuts and bruises on her face were more visible now that the dirt was washed away, but her eyes were bright and alert. Ryder stood as she approached. "You shouldn't be in here. This isn't a place for respectable women." "I stopped worrying about respectability when they put me in chains," Fiona replied, sitting down on the stool beside him. "Besides, I wanted to thank you properly for the clothes and for saving my life." The bartender brought over a glass of water without being asked, setting it down in front of Fiona with a respectful nod. She drank it gratefully, then turned to face Ryder fully. "I need to know what you're planning to do," she said quietly. "Are you going to turn me in to the authorities?" "I'm planning to help you get to someone who can hear your side of the story fairly. There's a judge in Phoenix, Judge Anderson, who has a reputation for being honest and thorough. If we can get you to him, you might have a chance at a real trial. Phoenix is more than 100 miles from here." "I know. Why would you do this for a stranger?" Ryder turned his whiskey glass in his hands, watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight. "Because I've seen what happens when the law fails people. Because my daughter would have been about your age if she'd lived, and I'd like to think someone would help her if she needed it. Because it's the right thing to do." Fiona's eyes glistened with sudden tears. "I didn't kill him, Ryder. I swear to you. I hit him with the poker when he came at me, and he fell and hit his head on the hearth. It was an accident. But he was the son of a wealthy mine owner, and I was just a woman working as a seamstress to make ends meet. No one would listen to my side. Then we'll make them listen." They left Coolidge before dawn the next morning, heading northwest toward Phoenix. Ryder had used the last of his savings to buy a second horse for Fiona, a gentle mare that had seen better days but was still sound. They rode through the cool morning hours, making good time across the desert scrubland. As the sun climbed higher, they stopped to rest in the shade of a rocky outcropping. Fiona dismounted and stretched, wincing at the soreness in her muscles from the previous day's ordeal. "Tell me about your family," Ryder said as he refilled their canteens from the water bags. "You said you grew up on a ranch in New Mexico." "My father raised cattle. It was a good life until the drought of '79. We lost most of the herd, and my father had to sell the land to pay his debts. He died 6 months later, I think from a broken heart as much as anything else. My mother passed when I was young, so I was alone." She sat down on a smooth rock and pulled her hat lower to shade her face. "I moved to Tucson because I had an aunt there who said she could help me find work. She introduced me to a woman who needed a seamstress, and I was good at it. I made enough to rent a small room and feed myself. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And the man who attacked you," Fiona's expression hardened. "His name was Robert Caldwell. He came into the shop one day to have some shirts mended. He seemed pleasant enough at first, always polite, always generous with tips. Then he started showing up at odd hours when he knew I'd be alone closing up. He started making comments about how pretty I was, how much he admired me. I tried to discourage him, but he wouldn't take no for an answer." She paused, her hands clenched in her lap. "One evening, about 3 months ago, he followed me back to my room. I thought he was just walking the same direction, but when I got to my door, he pushed his way inside. He said he'd been patient long enough, that I owed him for all the business he'd brought to the shop. When I told him to leave, he grabbed me and tried to kiss me. We struggled, and I managed to grab the poker from the fireplace. I just wanted to scare him, make him back off. But he lunged at me and I swung it without thinking. He fell backward and hit his head on the stone hearth. There was so much blood. Ryder could see her hands shaking. He reached over and covered them with his own, warm and steady. You did what you had to do to protect yourself. I ran for help, found a constable on the street. But when he came back with me and saw who it was, everything changed. Suddenly, I was the one being arrested. Robert's father showed up with his lawyers, and they painted me as a woman of loose morals who'd lured his son to my room and then killed him when he refused my advances. It was all lies, but everyone believed them because the Caldwells had money and influence, and I had nothing. How did you end up being transported to Yuma? The trial lasted less than a day. The judge wouldn't let me testify in my own defense, said my word wasn't reliable. They convicted me of manslaughter and sentenced me to 10 years. I was being transported to the prison when the bandits attacked. She looked up at Ryder. Part of me thinks maybe I should have just died in that stagecoach. At least then it would be over. Don't talk like that. His voice was firm but gentle. You survived for a reason. We're going to get you a fair hearing and you're going to get your life back. They rode on through the afternoon, following old Apache trails that Ryder knew from his scouting days. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled north, the desert giving way to areas with more vegetation and occasional water sources. They made camp that night beside a small stream, the first running water Fiona had seen in weeks. While Ryder tended to the horses and built a fire, Fiona washed her face and hands in the cool stream water, savoring the feeling of being clean. When she returned to the camp, he had coffee brewing and was frying salt pork in a pan over the flames. It's not fancy, but it'll keep us going, he said, handing her a tin plate with food. They ate in companionable silence, listening to the desert night sounds around them. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and somewhere an owl hooted. The stars overhead were brilliant, undimmed by any town lights. I never asked what you were going to do after meeting with that rancher, Fiona said, setting her empty plate aside. Taking me to Phoenix is going to cost you that job. The job will keep or it won't. This is more important. Why? You don't even know me. Ryder poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. Maybe that's exactly why. You're not tangled up in my past, not connected to all the things I've lost. Helping you feels like maybe I can still do some good in this world. Fiona moved closer to him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You're a good man, Ryder Thornton, better than you give yourself credit for. He looked at her then, really looked at her. In the firelight, with her hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes soft with gratitude, she was beautiful. Not in the polished way of society women, but in a raw, honest way that made his chest tighten. He realized with some surprise that he was attracted to her, had been since the moment she'd looked up at him in that stagecoach. We should get some sleep, he said abruptly, standing up and moving away. We have a long ride tomorrow. If Fiona noticed his sudden retreat, she didn't comment on it. She simply nodded and settled down on her bedroll, using her saddle as a pillow. Ryder took the first watch, sitting with his back against a boulder and his rifle across his knees, trying not to think about the woman sleeping a few feet away. They traveled for 3 more days, pushing hard to make distance. The route to Phoenix took them through increasingly rugged terrain, past abandoned mines and ghost towns that had sprung up during the silver rushes and died just as quickly when the ore ran out. They saw a few other travelers, which suited Ryder fine. The fewer people who could report seeing them, the better. On the fourth day, they stopped in a small settlement to resupply. While Ryder was in the general store, Fiona waited outside with the horses. She was standing in the shade, giving water to the mare, when she heard a familiar voice that made her blood run cold. Well, I'll be damned. Fiona Jameson, alive and well. She spun around to see a man in a marshal's badge standing on the wooden sidewalk. Marshal Dalton, the very man Harold Porter had warned Ryder about. He was a thick-set man in his 40s with a florid face and cold eyes. Marshal Dalton, she managed, her mouth suddenly dry. I heard reports of the Stagecoach ambush. They said there were no survivors. He walked toward her slowly, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. Looks like the reports were wrong. I was lucky. Someone found me before I died of thirst. Lucky indeed. And where is this good Samaritan now? Before Fiona could answer, Ryder stepped out of the general store, his arms full of supplies. He took in the scene instantly, his body going tense and alert. "Is there a problem here, Marshal?" he asked, setting the supplies down carefully. Dalton's eyes narrowed. "You the one who's been helping this fugitive?" "I found a woman in distress and rendered assistance. That's not a crime in any territory I know of. It is when the woman is an escaped prisoner convicted of manslaughter. I'm taking her back to stand before the judge in Tucson." "She never escaped. She was the only survivor of a bandit attack, and she's entitled to appeal her conviction to a higher court. We're taking her to Judge Anderson in Phoenix." Dalton laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Anderson, that bleeding heart won't give her a fair hearing. He'll just let her go because she's got a pretty face. No, she's coming back to Tucson with me, and you'll be charged with aiding a fugitive if you try to stop me." Ryder's hand moved to hover near his gun. "I don't want trouble, Marshal. But I'm not letting you take her without proper legal documentation. Show me a warrant for her arrest, issued by a judge with jurisdiction, and we'll talk." "I don't need a warrant. I know who she is and what she's convicted of." "Then you know the conviction was a sham." "She defended herself against a man who tried to force himself on her. She deserves a real trial, not a railroad job bought and paid for by a rich man's money." Dalton's face reddened with anger. "You calling me corrupt? I'm saying that justice wasn't served in Tucson, and you know it." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Fiona could see a small crowd gathering at a safe distance, townspeople drawn by the confrontation. She stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. "Please," she said, "I don't want anyone to get hurt over this. If I have to go back to Tucson, I'll go. But I'm asking you, Marshal Dalton, to at least let me have a proper lawyer and a fair hearing. That's all I want." Dalton studied her for a long moment, then shifted his gaze back to Ryder. "You must be some kind of fool, throwing your life away for a woman you barely know." "Maybe I am," Ryder replied, "but I'd rather be a fool with a conscience than a smart man without one." The standoff might have ended badly if not for the intervention of the town's mayor, a sensible man named George Murphy, who'd come out of his office to see what the commotion was about. After hearing both sides of the argument, he proposed a compromise. "Marshal Dalton, you're technically within your rights to take Miss Jameson back to Tucson. But Mr. Thornton here makes a valid point about appeals. What if we send a telegram to Judge Anderson in Phoenix, explain the situation, and see what he says? If he agrees to hear the case, you escort her to Phoenix under guard. If he declines, she goes back to Tucson with you. Fair." Dalton didn't like it, but he couldn't argue with the logic without looking unreasonable. "Fine, but I'm watching both of them until we get a response." They spent the next 2 days in the settlement, effectively under house arrest in the small hotel while they waited for Judge Anderson's reply. Dalton had them in separate rooms with a deputy watching the hallway. Ryder chafed at the confinement, pacing his small room like a caged animal. On the third day, the telegram arrived. Judge Anderson had agreed to hear the case and had ordered Fiona brought to Phoenix immediately for a proper hearing. More than that, he'd sent a stern message to Marshal Dalton reminding him of his duty to uphold justice, not just enforce the letter of the law. The marshal was furious, but had no choice but to comply. They set out for Phoenix the next morning, a strange party of 4. Ryder and Fiona riding together, and Dalton with his deputy trailing behind like suspicious shadows. The journey to Phoenix took another 4 days. Ryder and Fiona had little opportunity to speak privately with the lawman always watching, but they communicated through glances and small gestures. Ryder could see the fear in her eyes, the worry that even Judge Anderson might not believe her. He tried to convey reassurance through his steady presence, staying close to her whenever Dalton would allow it. Phoenix in the summer of 1883 was a growing city, still rough around the edges, but showing signs of the prosperity that would eventually make it a territorial capital. Judge Anderson had his chambers in a solid brick building near the center of town, and it was there that they presented themselves on a sweltering August morning. The judge was an older man with silver hair and keen blue eyes that seemed to see right through to a person's soul. He listened patiently as Marshal Dalton presented the facts of the case as he knew them, then turned his attention to Fiona. "Miss Jameson, I've read the transcript of your trial in Tucson. It's one of the most appalling miscarriages of justice I've seen in my 30 years on the bench. I'm going to set aside your conviction and order a new trial, to be held here in Phoenix where I can personally oversee the proceedings. You'll be released on your own recognizance until the trial date, which I'm setting for 3 weeks from today." Fiona swayed on her feet, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Ryder caught her elbow, steadying her. "Your Honor, I must protest," Dalton began, but the judge cut him off with a sharp look. "Your protest is noted and overruled, Marshal. The law requires that defendants receive competent legal representation and a fair hearing. Miss Jameson received neither. Now, unless you have new evidence to present, you're dismissed." Dalton left the chambers in a fury, his deputy hurrying after him. Ryder and Fiona remained, both of them slightly dazed by the turn of events. "Mr. Thornton," Judge Anderson said, fixing Ryder with that penetrating gaze, "I understand you've gone to considerable trouble and expense to bring Miss Jameson before me. That speaks well of your character. I'm going to ask you to continue your assistance by ensuring she appears for her trial. Can I count on you?" "Yes, Your Honor. You have my word." "Good. Miss Jameson, I'm assigning you a lawyer, a young man named Thomas Riley who's smart and honest and won't be intimidated by the Caldwell family's money. He'll meet with you tomorrow to begin preparing your defense. In the meantime, you're free to go." Walking out of that courthouse into the bright Phoenix sunshine was one of the most surreal moments of Fiona's life. For the first time in months, she wasn't in chains or under guard. She was free, if only temporarily. Ryder took her to a respectable boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, paying for a month's lodging in advance. Then he secured a room for himself at a cheaper establishment across town, determined to maintain propriety even though every instinct in him wanted to stay close to her. Over the next 3 weeks, Fiona met regularly with Thomas Riley, an earnest young lawyer fresh out of law school back east. He listened to her story with growing outrage and assured her that he would present the strongest defense possible. He tracked down witnesses who could speak to her good character, and even managed to find the doctor who'd examined Robert Caldwell's body and could testify that the injuries were consistent with an accidental fall. During this time, Ryder found work at a freight company, loading and unloading wagons to earn money for their expenses. But every evening, he would meet Fiona for dinner at a small restaurant near her boarding house. They would talk for hours, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. "What will you do if the trial goes in your favor?" Ryder asked one evening as they walked along the Salt River in the cooling twilight. "I don't know. I can't go back to Tucson, that's certain. Maybe I'll stay here in Phoenix, try to start over again." She glanced up at him. "What about you? Will you go back to drifting?" "I've been thinking maybe it's time to stop drifting. Maybe put down roots somewhere, build something lasting." They'd stopped walking, standing close together on the riverbank. The air between them crackled with unspoken feelings. Slowly, carefully, Ryder reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Fiona's ear. "I've been wanting to do something for weeks now," he said quietly. "But I didn't want to take advantage of the situation, didn't want you to feel obligated." "I don't feel obligated," Fiona whispered. "I feel grateful and hopeful, and something else I'm almost afraid to name. Name it anyway. I think I'm falling in love with you, Ryder Thornton. I know it's probably too soon and definitely too complicated, but that's how I feel." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "It's not too soon, and I don't care about complicated. I've been falling for you since the moment you looked up at me in that stagecoach with those storm cloud eyes." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey. Fiona wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the emotion she'd been holding inside for weeks. They stood there on the riverbank as the stars came out overhead, two broken people finding wholeness in each other. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in late August. The courtroom was packed with spectators drawn by the scandalous nature of the case. Representatives of the Caldwell family had come from Tucson, determined to see justice done for their son. But they hadn't counted on Judge Anderson's reputation for fairness or Thomas Riley's passionate advocacy. Over 3 days, the young lawyer systematically dismantled the prosecution's case. He presented witnesses who testified to Fiona's good character and Robert Caldwell's reputation as a man who didn't respect women's boundaries. The doctor's testimony about the accidental nature of the injuries was particularly damning to the prosecution's claim of premeditated murder. Most powerfully, Riley put Fiona on the stand and let her tell her story in her own words. She spoke clearly and honestly about the attack, about her fear, about the split-second decision to defend herself. By the time she finished, there were tears on the faces of several people in the courtroom. The prosecution tried to discredit her, but Judge Anderson wouldn't allow the kind of character assassination that had been permitted in Tucson. When the Caldwell family's lawyer attempted to suggest that Fiona had been a woman of loose morals, the judge shut him down immediately. "In this courtroom, we deal in facts and evidence, not innuendo and slander. The jury will disregard that question." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a verdict of not guilty on all charges. The foreman explained that they'd found Fiona's actions to be justified self-defense and saw no basis for criminal charges. Fiona collapsed in her chair, sobbing with relief. Ryder was at her side instantly, holding her as she shook with the release of months of fear and anguish. Even Thomas Riley had tears in his eyes as he shook their hands and congratulated Fiona on her freedom. Outside the courthouse, away from the crowds and the noise, Ryder and Fiona stood together in the shade of a cottonwood tree. She was truly free now, her name cleared, her future open before her. "What happens now?" she asked, looking up at him. "Now you get to decide what kind of life you want to build, and if you'll have me, I'd like to build it with you. Are you asking me to marry you, Ryder Thornton?" I'm asking you to give me the honor of spending the rest of my life making you happy. I'm asking you to be my wife, my partner, my everything. I know we haven't known each other long, but when you find the right person, time doesn't matter as much as what you feel." Fiona threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married a month later in a small church in Phoenix, with Judge Anderson serving as a witness and Mrs. Patterson insisting on hosting a small reception at her boarding house. Thomas Riley attended, along with several other friends they'd made during their time in the city. It was a simple ceremony, but filled with genuine love and joy. For their honeymoon, Ryder took Fiona north to the Mogollon Rim, where the high country provided a cool respite from the summer heat. They spent 2 weeks camping under the pines, fishing in clear mountain streams and learning each other in the way that newlyweds do. It was a time of healing for both of them, a chance to leave behind the trauma of the past and focus on their future together. When they returned to Phoenix, Ryder had made a decision about what came next. He'd been in touch with the rancher outside Coolidge who'd originally wanted to hire him, and the man had made a generous offer. If Ryder would manage his ranch, he'd provide a house and a share of the profits. It was the kind of opportunity Ryder had been hoping for, a chance to build something lasting. Fiona loved the idea immediately. "A ranch. I grew up on a ranch, remember? I know cattle and horses and how to work the land." "I was hoping you'd say that. We'll be partners in every sense of the word." They moved to the ranch outside Coolidge in September of 1883, just as the brutal summer heat was beginning to ease. The house was small but solidly built, with 2 bedrooms and a wide porch that looked out over the valley. The land stretched for miles, dotted with cattle and bordered by mountains in the distance. The owner, a man named Samuel Garrett who was getting too old to manage the place himself, welcomed them warmly. "I've been praying for good people to help run this ranch. The Lord must have been listening." Ryder and Fiona threw themselves into the work with an enthusiasm that impressed Samuel. Ryder's experience as a scout and his time working various jobs across the territory had given him a practical knowledge of ranching. Fiona's childhood on her father's ranch came back to her quickly, and she proved to be an excellent horsewoman and a shrewd judge of cattle. They worked from dawn to dusk through that fall and winter, mending fences, rounding up strays, preparing for the spring calving season. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way that neither of them had experienced in years. They were building something together, creating a life and a home. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Ryder would play the harmonica he'd owned since his Texas days, and Fiona would sing old songs her mother had taught her. Sometimes, Samuel would join them, sharing stories of the early days in Arizona territory when Apache warriors still raided settlements and the land was wild and untamed. "You two remind me of my wife and me when we were young," Samuel said one evening. "Full of hope and dreams and willing to work for what you want. That's what it takes to make it out here." As winter gave way to spring, Fiona began to suspect she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Ryder, choosing a quiet moment when they were alone in the barn. "I have news," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "We're going to have a baby." Ryder dropped the saddle he was holding and pulled her into his arms, whooping with joy. "A baby? Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. I think the baby will come in late October or early November." He kissed her deeply, then pulled back to look at her with wonder. "You've made me the happiest man alive, Fiona Thornton. I never thought I'd have this again, a family, a future. We're going to have it all. Everything we've dreamed of." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Fiona continued to work on the ranch as long as she was able, only slowing down in the last few months when her growing belly made it difficult to ride. Ryder became even more protective, insisting she rest more and take on only light tasks. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested, but she secretly loved his attentiveness. Samuel Garrett was delighted by the news of the coming baby. He'd never had children of his own, and he treated Ryder and Fiona like the son and daughter he'd never had. He spent weeks building a beautiful cradle from oak wood, carving intricate designs into the headboard. "Every baby needs a proper place to sleep," he said, presenting it to them with pride. On a crisp November morning in 1884, Fiona went into labor. Ryder rode into Coolidge to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Sarah Reynolds who delivered half the babies in the territory. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning, but finally, just as the sun was rising, the baby was born. "It's a boy," Sarah announced, placing the squalling infant in Fiona's arms. "A healthy, strong boy." Ryder looked down at his son with tears streaming down his face. The baby had a shock of dark hair and the Thornton family's brown eyes. He was perfect. "What should we name him?" Fiona asked, exhausted but radiant. "I was thinking we could name him after your father. What was his name, James?" "James Edward Jameson." "Then James Edward Thornton it is, Jamie for short." Little Jamie proved to be a happy, healthy baby who rarely cried and slept well. Fiona took to motherhood naturally, and Ryder was a devoted father, often taking the baby with him on a sling while he worked around the ranch, so Fiona could rest. Samuel doted on the child, spending hours rocking him and singing old cowboy songs. "This boy is going to grow up strong and smart, just like his parents," he'd say. As Jamie grew from a baby into a toddler, the ranch prospered. Ryder's hard work and good management resulted in healthy cattle and profitable sales. By 1886, they'd saved enough money to buy a share of the ranch from Samuel, making them true partners in the enterprise. "I always hoped this place would stay in good hands when I'm gone," Samuel said as they signed the papers. "Now I know it will." In the spring of 1887, Fiona discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was carrying twins, though they wouldn't know that until the midwife delivered them in December of that year. The births were easier than Jamie's had been, and suddenly, their family expanded to include a daughter they named Rose Margaret, and another son they named Samuel, after their dear friend. Samuel Garrett was moved to tears when they told him they'd named one of the twins after him. "I couldn't be prouder if they were my own grandchildren," he said, holding baby Samuel with trembling hands. Life on the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew healthy and strong, learning to ride almost before they could walk. Jamie proved to have his father's quiet strength and his mother's keen intelligence. Rose was spirited and adventurous, always getting into everything. Little Samuel was the gentlest of the three, with a special way with animals that amazed everyone. Ryder and Fiona's love for each other only deepened with time. Even after years of marriage, they still sought each other out, still found excuses to touch and kiss when the children weren't watching. They'd built the kind of partnership that others in the territory admired and envied. In the summer of 1889, Samuel Garrett passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. He'd lived long enough to see the ranch thriving and the Thornton family well established. His will left his remaining share of the ranch to Ryder and Fiona, making them the sole owners. "He gave us more than land," Fiona said at his funeral. "He gave us a chance when we needed it most. He believed in us." They buried Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch under a large oak tree. Ryder carved a headstone with the inscription, "Samuel Garrett, friend and mentor who saw the best in others." The children grew and the ranch expanded. By 1891, they'd added another 100 acres and increased their cattle herd substantially. Ryder hired several ranch hands to help with the work, and Fiona managed the household and the ranch's finances with skill and precision. Jamie, now 7 years old, already showed signs of becoming an excellent horseman and rancher. He would follow his father everywhere, asking endless questions and soaking up knowledge like a sponge. The twins, Rose and Samuel, were 5 and equally bright and curious about the world around them. One evening, as Ryder and Fiona sat on the porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard, she turned to him with a soft smile. "You ever think about that day in the desert?" she asked. "When you found me in the stagecoach, all the time. It was the day my life started over." "Mine too. I was so certain I was going to die out there. And then you appeared like something out of a dream. You shot that lock off my chains and asked me my name, and everything changed." Ryder pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made, stopping to investigate that abandoned stagecoach. I used to have nightmares about what would have happened if you hadn't found me, but I don't anymore. Now I only dream about our future." "What do you see in those dreams?" "I see us growing old together on this land we love. I see our children having children of their own. I see a legacy of love and hard work and integrity. I see everything we've built lasting long after we're gone. That's what I see too." As the years passed, all of Fiona's dreams came true. The ranch became one of the most successful in the territory, known for quality cattle and honest dealings. Jamie grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch management as Ryder got older. Rose married a lawyer from Phoenix and gave them 3 grandchildren. Samuel became a horse trainer, developing a reputation throughout Arizona for his gentle methods and the quality of horses he produced. Ryder and Fiona celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary in 1904, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. The celebration was held at the ranch, with neighbors and friends coming from miles around to join in the festivities. 20 years, Fiona marveled, looking at the silver strands in Ryder's hair and the lines around his eyes. "It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all." 20 years of waking up next to the most beautiful woman in Arizona. 20 years of building something that matters. 20 years of loving you more with each passing day. Jamie stood to give a toast, his wife and young children beside him. "To my parents, who showed me what true love and partnership looks like. Who built this ranch from nothing but determination and hard work. Who never gave up on each other or on their dreams. May we all be so blessed." As Fiona looked around at the gathering, at the family and friends and the land stretching out in every direction, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her life could have ended in that abandoned stagecoach in the desert. Instead, it had transformed into something more beautiful than she'd ever imagined possible. The years continued to pass. Ryder and Fiona grew older but remained active on the ranch, though they gradually turned over more responsibilities to Jamie and his wife. They took pleasure in their grandchildren, teaching them to ride and sharing stories of the old days. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, they would ride out together to a special spot on the ranch where they could see for miles in every direction. It was there, overlooking the land they'd built together, that they felt most at peace. "You have any regrets?" Fiona asked one such evening when she was 61 and Ryder was 64. "Not a single one. You? Only that I can't live this life twice. Once doesn't seem like enough time to spend with you." Ryder dismounted and helped her down from her horse, then pulled her into his arms. Even after all these years, his touch still made her heart race. "Then we'll just have to make sure we don't waste a single moment of the time we have." They stood together, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a love that would last forever. The abandoned stagecoach in the desert was long gone, reclaimed by the elements. The shackles that had bound Fiona's wrists had rusted away to nothing. But the bond between them had only grown stronger with time. In the years that followed, they watched their grandchildren grow and have children of their own. The Thornton Ranch passed down through the generations, each one adding their own contributions while maintaining the values and integrity that Ryder and Fiona had established. When Ryder passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1921 at the age of 81, Fiona grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She lived for another 3 years, spending her time sharing stories of their life together and ensuring that future generations would know the legacy they'd built. On a warm April evening in 1924, Fiona sat on the porch of the ranch house, surrounded by family. Her great-grandson, a bright-eyed boy named Ryder after his great-grandfather, climbed into her lap. "Great-grandma, tell us the story again," he begged. "About how great-grandpa saved you." Fiona smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "It was a long time ago in the summer of 1883. I was trapped in an abandoned stagecoach in the middle of the desert, certain I was going to die. Then I heard a horse approaching, and there was your great-grandfather. He was the most handsome man I'd ever seen, even covered in trail dust. He shot the lock off my chains, helped me out of that stagecoach and asked me my name, and from that moment on, we were never apart." "Did you love him right away?" young Ryder asked. "I think part of me did. But real love, the kind that lasts a lifetime, that takes time to build. It takes trust and partnership and choosing each other every single day, even when things are hard. Your great-grandfather and I built that kind of love, and it sustained us through everything life threw at us. I want to find a love like that someday," the boy said seriously. "You will, sweetheart. When you find the right person, you'll know. Your heart will tell you." That night, Fiona passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the family she and Ryder had created. They buried her next to him on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the shade of the oak tree where Samuel Garrett also rested. The inscription on her headstone read, "Fiona Jameson Thornton, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She knew the meaning of true love." The ranch continued to thrive for generations, a testament to the foundation that Ryder and Fiona had built. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the land, still told stories of the cowboy who found a woman shackled in an abandoned stagecoach and gave her back her freedom and her life. It became a family legend, the story of how their dynasty began. Not with wealth or privilege, but with a simple act of compassion in the Arizona desert. A cowboy who stopped to help a stranger in need. A woman who found the courage to fight for justice and for love. Two broken people who found wholeness in each other and built something that would last long after they were gone. The land still bears the Thornton name. The values they established, honesty, hard work, compassion, and integrity, still guide their descendants. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blows across the valley and the sunset paints the sky in brilliant colors, some say you can still feel their presence there. Two souls forever bound by a love that began with a gunshot and a simple question spoken in the desert heat. "What's your name?" Those 3 words had changed everything. They'd been the beginning of a conversation that lasted a lifetime, the start of a partnership that transformed both their lives. From the moment Fiona answered, "Fiona, Fiona Jameson," their fates had been intertwined. The abandoned stagecoach, the shackles, the heat and desperation of that July day in 1883, All of it had led to this, a legacy of love that would endure for generations. A family built on the foundation of two people who'd refused to give up on each other or on the promise of a better future. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift they left behind. Not just the land or the cattle or the prosperity they'd worked so hard to achieve, but the example of what two people could build together when they faced life as true partners. When they chose love over fear, hope over despair, and each other above all else. The story of Ryder and Fiona Thornton became more than just family history. It became a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most unexpected ways. That a single act of kindness can change the course of multiple lives. That true love isn't found, it's built, day by day, choice by choice, through all the joys and sorrows that life brings. Their descendants carry that knowledge with them still, passing it down from parent to child, generation after generation. And somewhere in the Arizona desert, if you know where to look, you might still find traces of an old stagecoach trail, long abandoned but never quite forgotten. It was there on that trail that two lives collided and transformed, where a cowboy's simple question, spoken in the blazing heat of a July afternoon, became the first words of a love story that would echo through the decades. "What's your name?" 3 words that changed everything. 3 words that began a journey neither of them could have imagined. 3 words that led to a love for the ages, a family that would flourish, and a legacy that would never die. And that is how the Thornton dynasty began, not with grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, but with compassion, courage, and the willingness to see another person's humanity in their darkest hour. With a man who stopped to help and a woman who found the strength to keep fighting. With 2 hearts that recognized in each other the possibility of home. Their story lives on in the wind that whispers through the valley, in the land that still bears their name, in the faces of children who carry their blood and their spirit. It lives on as a testament to the power of love to heal, to transform, to create something lasting and beautiful from the broken pieces of 2 shattered lives. Ryder Thornton found Fiona Jameson shackled inside an abandoned stagecoach on a blazing summer day in 1883. He shot the lock and asked her name, and in answering she gave him her heart, her trust, and her future. Together they built an empire of love that would stand the test of time, a legacy that would inspire generations yet to come. This is their story. This is how it all began. And this is how true love, once found, never truly ends.